This for? I told DPS.
Good morning, everybody,
But yeah, I mean, I think we are.
in our new room. We're still figuring it out as we go here. We may continue to make some tweaks to the room. I tried my hardest to get a lot of people around this table. Only Meredith and Alan and Robert stayed. They're like the facilitators' pets or something. I don't know. We're going to make this room work. Good to see everybody. We may have a few more people come in as the meeting proceeds. We've got a number of people online, and we actually have, well, what is it, the deputy chair of the
Vice Chair.
vice chair? Okay, so we've got Delegate Foley with us here today for the first time. I'm going to have her formally introduce herself.
Hi, as Steve said, I'm Delegate Linda Foley. I'm from District 15, which is like Western Montgomery County, Potomac, North Potomac, Germantown, that area. I'm here because I'm the Vice Chair of the Metropolitan Washington Committee of the delegation, of the Montgomery County delegation. So I'm the Vice Chair to Leslie. Leslie couldn't be here today, Delegate Lopez, and she conveys her regrets, but I'm here to be her eyes and ears today. So thank you for having me.
Thank you.
And she's the disciplinarian if anyone gets out of hand. So. All right, so as always, we have a full agenda here, full for 3 hours. So given a number of reasons, we decided to shorten this meeting by about an hour. So we hope to get everyone out by 12:30. I'm getting some thumbs up already, so I guess that was a good decision. These 4-hour meetings do feel long sometimes. And so let me just quickly ground us so you all have seen these slides before, but again, just to remind us, we're looking for areas of consensus to improve on the current development review process. We're looking to finalize a consensus agreement by mid-October. That's both for the state delegation to introduce into the State House, as well as recommendations that will go to county executive, county council, and the planning board, whatever those end up being. So we've got approximately, and really we have to have them ready by October 1, so we've got about 2 months left. No pressure, okay? All right. Just again, ground rules for effective deliberation. There are things we're going to be, that we will disagree upon, and that's fine. I don't expect for everyone to agree on everything throughout this process, but I just encourage you in these meetings to listen with intentionality and goodwill, to speak from your interest and stake, but also be thinking about the whole, and to help me create a supportive environment, help me keep conversations focused and on topic, and from your vantage point, what do you need in order to come to agreement with the group? So that's for every single meeting we do. So again, we're pushing towards where can we converge, while there will be areas where we diverge. So we have, beyond today, we had 2 August meetings scheduled. They should already be on the books. I don't know if calendar invites have gone out. Our little planning group decided that we definitely need to get dates on for September to drive towards September 30th finality. We've got 3 meetings scheduled on consecutive Wednesdays, 13th, 20th, 27th. Like today, those 3 meetings will be scheduled for 3 hours. We hope we don't need all 3, but we're going to have all 3 on the books until we decide either we're done or we're not done, all right? So if those calendar invites have not gone out yet, they will go out next week, just so it gets on everyone's calendar. Just a reminder, we have a virtual public hearing next Wednesday night, August 2nd. That will be virtual. That will be 6:30 to 8:30, and that will be chaired by Delegate Lopez. And the format will work much like we have in terms of the hybrid meetings so far, but obviously all testimony will be given via Zoom or Teams. And just kind of a heads up, we have, for our next meeting on the 8th, we have Levu and Pam Dunn from the work group are looking at all the public comments and just trying to help organize and categorize them in preparation for our August 8th meeting, so we can all be looking at the same data set, hopefully in a easily or somewhat easily digestible form, because there's now probably 30 or 30 plus comments we've gotten from the public so far. We're expecting more, obviously, on the 2nd, and it's going to remain open through August. So whatever we've got through August 2nd, that's what we'll be looking at as a major agenda item on the 8th of August.
I just wanted to make sure that any testimony that had come in written-wise since the hearing had been distributed, because I think there might be at least one that wasn't.
So
We can make sure
I know I'm pretty sure we circulated everything from the last public hearing. I have not seen anything since, but we can.
Cheryl Gannon sent in her testimony to both planning and to me. So maybe you haven't seen it either.
Use them.
Oh, I'm sorry. I believe that Cheryl Gannon, who testified at the last public hearing, now sent in written comments, and we just received those. I can forward them to you, Steve, so you could forward them to the group.
Okay.
Okay.
But yes, so we can keep circulating. The idea through the 2nd is that whatever we've received through then, we're going to organize them as best as possible so that you can digest them and not have to be sorting through, 25 different emails sent over 5 or 6 weeks. But yeah, we can send out whatever we've received since last week. Thanks, Amanda. All right, so we did, I would say, an 85% job of holding to our promise to get everything circulated to you 36 hours in advance, so you should have gotten an email from us to get ready for today by Wednesday evening. There is a joint presentation that I think Robert, Tim, and Hassan worked on until 4:30 this morning. So there are hard copies on the table. All the stuff that you need hard copy are on that front table to the right if you haven't picked things up, including that document. And that document can also be sent around electronically on Monday. All right. Just want to remind, also here, I can't remember if we circulated, the original letter of intent from February is on the table over here if you need copies. Again, the high-level review is we're reviewing development review timelines. We're looking to refine deadlines for development review where appropriate. We're looking to see what's needed to hit benchmarks, where timelines can be shortened. We're looking at the challenges and opportunities for participating in the development review process. Opportunities to better align county and state functions, and we actually identified one last time. Methods to work out conflicting issues during the development review process, and also market trends affecting timing of development review. Now, obviously, especially this group was supposed to begin, I think, late April, early May. We didn't get started until mid-June. We're probably not going to be able to address every single one of those, but this is just kind of a reminder of what the original letter of intent said. And then in working group meeting 2, things that you all identified included that we wanted to make sure that we focused on in subsequent meetings. Common delays and pain points, revisiting the lead agency memo, which we did last time, but we may revisit it one more time prior to October just to get really clear what we're wanting any group that's going to be focused on revisions to really focus on. Looking for benchmarks in apple-to-apple comparisons, integrating and synchronizing parts of the process, and making sure, and to me as a member of the general public, making sure this is a really clearly delineated for people who aren't involved in development review, but they are going to hear about it. They know it's important for the county's economic future, but just to make sure that it's done in a way that lay people can really digest it. All right. So for this meeting, we're going to be looking at a couple of memos in a moment to understand more deeply the process and data from planning and Department of Permitting Services. We're going to be reviewing specific projects to understand common pain points across a few major ones. We're going to be discussing areas for improvement, areas working well, common pain points, and what information and data we all may still need in order to begin making recommendations. And then we're going to be looking to all of you to begin identifying, and this is not kind of for, you know, kind of permanent ideas, but it's your initial ideas of where we might be looking at improving the overall development process. Here's the agenda. I'm not going to talk you through it because I just more or less identified all the things. We're probably going to be spending about 30 to 40 minutes on the memos, both allowing you to read it and discussing them. About an hour and a half on the presentation and discussion of the several projects that have been jointly identified. And that will include the open discussion where we're looking for you to ask the questions that you have, clarifying things, and then beginning to identify areas for improvement, et cetera. And then by the end of the meeting, I'm going to ask each of you to write down at least one or two ideas on Post-it notes that I will take with me on specific things based on everything we've learned so far in all 5 working group meetings, things that you think are candidates for recommendations for improvement. I also want to make sure before we close, we have developed a draft survey that would go out that will allow people to put in their ideas anonymously beyond kind of public comment. So we've got copies of that, hard copies of that survey, and planning has been great in terms they actually put it in a survey platform. We can take a quick look at it at the end just for any final feedback before that goes out next week. So we got a lot to do. With that, I'm going to ask that everyone make sure they have a copy of 2 documents, either electronically or hard copy. So there's a Word document, which is the memo from planning, and then there's kind of 2 versions of the Department of Permitting Services, one that's got 2 slides per page, one that's got 1 slide per page. So what we're asking you to do, and you know, hopefully because you got these Wednesday evening, you might have been able to spend a little bit of time on them, but I want to give everyone 10 minutes in silence or sufficient quiet to read through both documents and see where you have questions, things that you need to clarify, or any comments about what was written. We decided not to do these as presentations because we're really trying to move into more discussion going forward. So if you need those documents, they're over there. For folks who are on Teams, hopefully you can take them out of your email from Wednesday late afternoon. Again, it's the memo Word document from planning, and it's the PowerPoint or PDF of slides from DPS. So I'm going to set my clock now, 10 minutes. There's a lot to read there. If you need more, we can give you more, but the clock starts now.
Okay, so Steve, one quick question, and you may have said it and I missed it while I was trying to make sure I had the right thing pulled up. The DPS slides that were included, are these changes from DPS or are they changes from somebody else?
So this is a slide deck put together by DPS, just going into greater detail of data that they didn't present
Okay.
in working group meeting 2 or 3.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
tell them to contact me, please. Thank you.
So we're at 10 minutes, but I see there's a number of people still reading. 3 or 4 minutes additional, would that help for folks? Okay, why don't we take 4 more minutes? All right, about 30 more seconds. All right, so we're going to open it up to questions first. And so the first order of business is if you're speaking, you need to have a microphone in front of you. So there's two types of microphones at your table. Ones that look like this, just make sure that the green light is on. They all should be. And there's also these handhelds, okay? But just make sure that this way everyone in the room can hear you, everyone on Teams can hear you. And so let me just see hands of people. So actually, let me do it this way. So let's go memo by memo. Let's start with Department of Permitting Services first, this one. Questions, things that you'd like clarified. And then once questions are taken and we've exhausted the questions, then we can move to any comments people have. Once we're done with that, we'll move to the planning memo. Okay, so if I can just see hands of people who would like to go. So we'll start, hold on, delegate, then Neil. Do I have anyone online that wants to get in line here? Not yet. All right, so, oh, I'm sorry, Alan. You're right in front of me. And then Sharice. So so 1, 2, 3, 4. Remember your number because I may not remember the order in which I just did that. So Delegate Foley, go ahead.
Thank you. Do I have to hold this in when I talk?
You do.
Okay.
No, you don't need to hold it in. No. You just need to just keep it in front of your mouth. That's all.
Now it's blinking. Why is it blinking? Oh.
Here you go, Delegate.
Oh, thank you. That's much better. Thank you. Well, now it's steady.
Now
Now it's working. Okay, sorry for taking up
No
that
problem.
time. So these are pretty elementary questions, and they're just for my clarification, and I apologize because I have not been in this discussion. But in this slide deck, where it says commercial permits and plan review workflows, that's my first question, which is, it says here that each workflow may result in several review cycles. And my question is, and again, I apologize for not knowing the process that well, but does that mean that every workflow then is reinitiated, or just that particular workflow that needs a review? So in
Correct.
other words, if there needs to be a review on zoning, there's a workflow there. Does that initiate the whole process then being reviewed, or just the zoning piece of it?
Got it. So I'm going to have Ihsan clarify. Ihsan, make sure you've got a microphone.
Hello.
Yeah, you're good.
I'm good. Okay, I'm loud enough. I think everybody can hear me. Regardless, so the workflow, as you see, when the permit application comes in, it goes through 6 different workflow at DPS: commercial, zoning, well and septic, park and planning, HHS. And in each group, for example, your question was about the zoning. So the workflow is already created. So if there is any issue, so the plan review reviews it, and if they have any comment, it goes back to the applicant. There is no new workflow. The workflow is existing. It's just
Right,
the
I
comments
think
goes
my
back.
question was, does it start over on everything or just that piece? So if we're dealing with zoning, it's just the zoning portion of the application that goes back to the applicant, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question is on the slide that says commercial permits, issuance, and review times, but really throughout all these review times. So when it says on the first chart there, time to issue permits, 62 business days to issue a permit, average. When are you looking at the clock starting on that? When the applicant puts in the application, or when it's received?
So the clock starts at when the intake, so we have an intake, which is our permit technician that do the screening, and they usually do it in 2 business days. Once it's accepted, it's a complete package, the clock starts.
Okay, so it starts essentially when they submit it, within 2 days of them submitting
Within
it.
2 days.
Okay.
Once it's clear, hey, we have a
Right.
complete documentation, then it's sent to the plan reviewers for the review
And that's when
comment.
that's the
It
62
starts-
days.
Exactly.
Okay, great, thank you.
Absolutely.
And these kinds of questions are really important because not everyone understands every part. And some of us, like me, like you, we're kind of drinking from the fire hose, right? So appreciate the questions. Neil.
Do I have to? No, okay, it's good. All right. Neil Blanc filling in for Gary, for Rogers. I just had a question. Something that caught my eye on the public right-of-way permits issuance time slide was 274 business days for a public right-of-way permit. And that caught my eye because given my experience, that seems awfully high. That's a full calendar year, and in our experience, it doesn't typically take quite that long, but maybe that's the real data. So either that is accurate, and that is certainly worth focusing on, or it seems maybe slightly inaccurate in my experience. So I'm just wondering to hear, I guess, the same question, like, when exactly does that data start?
When does the clock begin? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Neil, as you know, usually the right-of-way and sediment control, they start before the building permit issuance because the contractor, the applicant, they want to start their mass grading and they start the work before they can get the building permit, grading and everything else that's associated with that project. So when they come in, you have, and I think there's an explanation on the next page if you look at it. If you go to the next one, which is sheet number 10, public right-of-way permit review. So really look at the cycles. If you're looking at it, the cycles that take in between us and the applicant, on the average, it's taking land development and the applicant 4 review cycles for the permit going back and forth. Look at the time it takes us. So we are doing our review 91% completed within 20 business days. But when you look at the applicant time, they are doing it, 66% is done within 20 business days, but really it's taking them 25 business days. So if you look at those 4 reviews, just going back their time and our time, and also the permit can be done, the public right-of-way, land development has looked at it, meets everything, all the review goes back and forth. Now we have to make sure all the easements, everything's
The
recorded.
plats and-
The
yeah.
bond is posted,
Yeah.
all the outstanding fees is paid. Anything else?
Hi. Hi, everybody. I'm Linda Kabilski, the Division Chief for Land Development. One point of clarity, the issuance time, Neil, starts from the time that application comes through the door. We can't change it. That's coming right out of our permitting system. And there are often times when a piece of property is going through a subdivision process, they need to apply for that right-of-way permit and post a bond. It could be years later before they actually come in and submit plans to go to full construction. So that permit issuance time of, what was it, 274 days, that has to include some of that. It has to include some of that because, as you see, our review cycles were minimal on average. And then we do have, as Ehsan said, before permits can actually be issued, there are other outside forces that we have to wait to actually issue the permit. I hope that makes sense. Because when you look at the data for the 274 days, it's looking at the first date that application was posted. We may not have had plans submitted to us again for months. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Don't forget the plat approval.
Yeah.
So that
which
could hold
can
up
slow things
everything
down quite a
for
bit,
weeks,
yeah.
if not months.
So there's a lot of pieces that add up to that 274 days.
Absolutely.
Neil, any follow-ups, or is that clear?
No, I do want to highlight the 25 business days per review cycle on sort of the industry side. I mean, that's certainly a component to all of this that I think, obviously we're focused on the agencies, but, we're going to take accountability on how we can help speed this process up as well. And we've been doing a lot of education and outreach, and I think that's helped speed up the process. And
Right.
wherever-
And Neil, my question to you, your experience, how is it that you are dealing with DPS? Is it your timeline less than
Well, I
that,
mean,
or is it-
we're not waiting a whole year for a permit, which is great. So, and that may speak to, I don't know, our plan quality, I guess, I don't know. But you guys have been flexible with working with the process and making sure that we get permits when we need them. And I do want to emphasize that, that's a good thing for the overall process.
And
Thank
what
you.
you're saying is there's accountability on both sides, right?
Yeah, and there
How
needs to be.
quickly developers move on getting stuff back in. Okay, great. All right, so third is Alan.
Yes, on slide number 3, this is really elemental stuff, sorry. This is, commercial construction permits cover everything except single-family, is that correct?
Single family would be residential, correct?
Right, so townhouses are commercial?
It depends, right? 4 stories
Okay.
would be, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Those are the townhouses are 4 stories. If it's 3 stories and lower, it's going to be residential.
That actually is a great segue to my question. I have 2, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
So As part of this review, my understanding is that it's residents and applicants for development, which would be more commercialized. So in our review of these processes, are we only looking at the larger commercial developments, or do we have any representation here of residential units and their process, and should we be including those in here?
So that's a great question. So my task was to look at the projects that were approved by Park and Planning.
Okay.
So those are the ones that are certified site plan. So that's, but of course, we have other tracks, because like I said, we issue like around 40,000 permits a year, and a lot of them are residential, and there are projects, single-family home or other types. It could be commercial, but it did not need it to go through site plan review process.
So I want to make sure that I'm clear. So to Sharice's question, so what kinds of projects are not kind of in what you looked at? Like what are some examples of projects that wouldn't end up in this data?
It could be project that did not, I mean, everything else that did not go through Park and Planning. So it could be, for example, we got fence permits, we got sheds, we got addition. Or it could be interior alteration to an existing commercial building. So those do not go through Park and Planning. So they already have gone through the site plan before. So we look at them and we issue them. It's not part of this.
Do accessory dwelling units go through Park and Planning?
No.
They do
That
not.
would be us. Just
Okay.
about 99% would be us.
Okay.
Follow up or?
Yes. Oh, so on meeting for community correspondence, and you mentioned this too, the record plat approval sort of being a portion of why this right-of-way issuance is so long. I would just encourage everyone to look at this NAIOP, Commercial Real Estate Development Association's comments submitted on the 25th. They actually gave some very, I think, useful feedback that could be something relative to what gets put in the legislation, if anything, because it's, separating the record plat approval from the permit issuance and making the bonding, as the lady was saying, sort of like, a contingency later on, so it doesn't muck up the process. So just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, and we would love when we get to that, really to have an open discussion about that, because we agree with most of it, but also we have our concerns if it's taken away from DPS and it's just going to be Park and Planning to be looking at the plats.
Understood.
And Sharice, that was a comment that just came in this week, is that?
Yes,
or is
it's
that
the
June 25th
last.
or July 25th?
This is July 25th.
Okay.
It was on the meeting for correspondence sent out last night or whenever.
Okay, so we'll also flag that for the August 8th conversation. Thank you. All right, so who wants to get in line next for questions?
For the planning?
No,
memo,
for this, the
DPS
same,
still? Okay.
permitting? Or comments before we move on?
I have a quick question. I'm also very loud. So my question.
Still need your mic. I'm loud too.
So my question is, in the e-plan system, does it send the applicant reminders, or it does send them reminders? Okay.
And I believe 10 days, 20 days.
Hold that microphone up so
Absolutely.
people,
I'm sorry, it depends on the type of permit.
Okay.
So most of them, I would say it's 3, 6, 9 days. Those are for some of the smaller projects. I believe with commercial building, it's probably 10 to every 10, 15, 20 days, you get a reminder. In my world, in land development, it's 90 days. Because not to get too deep into the weeds, but when they get those reminders, eventually you'll get a nice little nastygram that says we're suspending this application unless you return plans to us for further review. And if we had such short time frames, we know the engineers can't meet those deadlines. So we have 90 days in land development.
Is it the same now that we are upgrading? Is that going to change, or?
It's going to change.
It's going to change for the better, I hope.
I think so.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Any questions or comments about this slide deck? I don't see any virtually. All right, so let's move on to the planning memo. Let me see a show of hands so let's start with just questions, either questions for clarification primarily, and then we can move into discussions and comments. So folks who have questions. Neil, you'll be first. Only one question. All right, at least to start with Neil.
Great. So I've been following along with these videos, and forgive me if the answer has already been provided for this question, but for the park and planning data dashboard, that thing is incredible in my view. Where does that pull its data from? Is it from Project Docs?
It's from Project Docs, which is ePlans. And
Okay.
it's the same thing.
You're right, and
Yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong, all 4 agency groups utilize ePlans?
They
Okay.
do.
So the follow-up question is, in the scope of what we're trying to do in the timeline, is there any way to provide the same dashboard for DPS, DOT, DEP, so that we're all operating from an apples-to-apples data comparison set? Because otherwise, I feel like we're sort of utilizing different, data perspectives. And in order to really answer this question, I would like a lot of objective resolution on how all this works. And having a singular data dashboard would go a long way, in my opinion.
Well, and I think it's a great question. It's come up within the work group, I think, a couple of times after that was presented. It came up at our board's presentation of the dashboard yesterday about how do we make this more collective. And I think what you'll see in the presentations today by myself and Tim and Hassan was we were really trying to look at the whole process, which I believe is what part of the goal here is to look at the process and kind of identify improvements. But a dashboard on a very collective and comprehensive basis would be very useful. And we agree with the question. I don't know how we get there, but because of the different agencies, but I think it's something that we should definitely explore.
Yeah,
Yeah, and that definitely came up in previous meetings, and so that may even be something that rises to the level of an actual recommendation of some period of time in which to figure out how to synchronize where we can.
Yeah, I can't underscore how important it is to have an objective set of data before we rush to decisions. I mean, we have to make smart decisions, especially with what's going on in the market in Montgomery County. We need to make smart decisions, not rush decisions. I do also just briefly want to echo the sentiment in this memo. At watching sort of third-party objective, I felt very similarly. So I just want to underscore that this memo, I think, represents a valid perspective.
Okay. Anyone else with questions to clarify before we move into comments? All right, so let's see
show of hands for folks who would like to comment on the memo, and Robert and others can feel free to respond to comments. So who'd like to go first? Tom.
I can wait if somebody else wants to comment.
You're first and last right now.
Okay.
Just make sure you got a mic.
Yes, okay, thank you. Yeah, so, on behalf of the executive agencies, I do feel the need to comment on the memo. Just the fact that in it alleges a couple of times, multiple times, that the presentation and the information was false and inaccurate and misleading. And, I would say I do understand that there's difference of opinion about what data ought to be, presented to the committee. I get that, and what things are most important for that decision-making process. But I think that the language is inflammatory and not helpful. But, I think after planning's initial presentation of the raw data and the averages, we had a brief discussion on the executive side to say, we really think it would be helpful to have more than just averages, to have also, how many permits miss the deadline, how long is the time that before something gets finished, not permits, approvals, et cetera. And, and I think there was a difference of opinion for planning, and I don't want to speak for Robert and his team, but it felt like, the averages were sufficient, and the raw data was there for people to look at. And in fact, they said, look, the raw data is there. If you want to do more analysis, do more analysis. And so we did do more, on the executive branch, we did do more analysis. And this was, this memo is a response to some of the histograms that were provided. And I would just say that all the data in those histograms is from ePlans. Almost all the data is from the planning website. Some of it is from data that comes from ePlans that DOT keeps internally to keep their records and to make sure that they're complying with their deadlines. And I think that was part of the presentation about DOT meeting the 14-day timeframe to meet the limits on the, or to respond to the DRC. And, I think, when DOT was presenting that, he kind of had a misstatement there where he said, like, the letter, which is a later piece of the process, and this is just the comments, and certainly that's needed to be corrected. So it was 14 days for the comments, and, it showed the histogram that showed when that was. I think that, since it's all from E-plans, and almost all is from the data that's from the planning website, if the planning website data and the E-plans data is accurate and true and not misleading in either the way it's presented or framed in E-plans or in the data that DOT keeps or that DPS keeps or the way that planning keeps theirs, what the categories are. To the extent that that's accurate, true, and not misleading, then the histograms that are based on that data are accurate, true, and not misleading. So depends on the data, whether the histogram is accurate and true. So I think we all think that the E-plans data is pretty reliable, and I think that the planning data looks very reliable and consistent. But this is just another way to look at it, and that's what we were trying to do. We thought that was important. We thought it would show how long, how many projects are past the deadline, how many projects are, or how long it takes average, and we just had a comment about the 270 some days for one part of the DPS stuff. We think it's important, and we think it's important for the whole process from start to finish, from the DOT side, the planning part, and the permit side. I will say, and apologies for this, we had some issues with the permitting data where the format didn't lend itself quite as easily to doing a histogram, and so those are in the discussion today in that memo. So that was done. It's a difference of opinion about what data is important and what's critical, but I think the characterization of data that was presented by the executive agency that said it was inaccurate, false, and misleading is not accurate and really is not appropriate for this kind of a setting in a public record when it is really what I think is maybe a difference of opinion about how to present the data and what data needs to be presented. But I think wanted to mention that, and I know Robert and I have had brief discussions and a difference of opinion on some of this, but I just think that that's a characterization that's just not helpful. So we just want to make that comment. And so.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Robert, you want to, I know there's a lot to respond to there, so.
I mean, I've talked to Tom, and I think our comment and our letter for correction still stands. So comments noted, and I think the point of this group is really to look at how we move ahead with some good suggestions on improvements or also identifying what works well. So I don't have anything else to add to that.
So Meredith, then Neil.
Well, it would have been very hard to anticipate this being so controversial. The executive will respond to that memo because there's a lot that could be said, and I'm not going to say it right now. We will respond, and everybody will get a copy. But to go back to just the main point here, the idea of getting the histogram data is so that we can see where the delays come up. And that's what that histogram shows. When you do averages, you've got the case that took 1 day, and you've got the case that took 500 days. and then you average that, and you don't know which things have become the most important to look at. Take intake, for example. For intake, which we're also getting comments on, the intake, the statute says, you'll file it in 10 days, and then you can amend it and do another 10 days. But when we looked at the averages, it turned out that, 88% were over 10 days. And then Robert has provided an explanation. He's saying, yes, because they keep resubmitting. But now we can learn, are we now saying that intake actually takes 60 days, 50 days? And that's why this data is very useful. And we submitted a request for clarification, and that has not been answered, because we wanted to hear the reasons. We wanted to know, why the data looked the way it did, because it's just based on all of the cases. Tim has the spreadsheet of every single case that came up, and the numbers are useful, but they do need to be interpreted, because we need to focus our attention on the big problems. We could make all these changes, and if they only affect 10% of the cases, the projects, we haven't achieved much.
Thank you, Meredith. Neil?
So sitting sort of third party in this and just trying to get to what is actually going on, what is actually the problem here, it seems to make sense to me again. Is there a way for us to all get to a mutual frame in terms of how we're presenting this data, for each agency to take responsibility for what data is theirs, and then to come together and present that in the same format, via a histogram, via the dashboard, but have the same graphs to look at? Because I don't doubt that there isn't improvements to be made for all agencies here. And for just a mutual, because right now we're having differences of opinions, right? But it's data. If we present it in the same way, there won't be opinions, it'll be objective. So that's what I'm driving towards, and what I think would really help this group out is a mutual frame for the data. Then we can answer questions, but until then, it's subjective.
So Fred, and then let me just see, Fred, then Sharice.
Okay. And
Okay.
This is more along the lines of just being an observer. And there was a comment that was made in the memo that said that we need to evaluate the aspirational review timelines or targets, you know what I mean? So more of everybody needs to come together and say, this is what we want to agree upon of what we want to see. And then mention, like Neil said, kind of then present it similarly across the board. That way you're looking at something that everyone's already agreed upon, and it's all being presented kind of the same way. I think when one person submits something that's one way, and another person submits something another way, I believe Robert said his information was just out there, you know what I mean? It wasn't really kind of put together, so people were just grabbing that information, you know what I mean? And then kind of putting it into whatever format made sense to them, you know what I mean? So it's more along the lines of coming together, agreeing upon what the targets or, how you want to present the information, and then, and then presenting it, and then seeing, hopefully you'd be able to identify those issues.
So I think both points are important here in terms of if we're going to make changes or improvements to this process, it has to be based on the good data or the data that we need in order to make those judgments, right? I mean, that's kind of what I'm hearing. Tim. I'm sorry, Sharice, then Tim.
Oh, okay. Yeah, data is dangerous, right? Because when it's created for one or two or three purposes, but then when you try to extract a fourth, fifth, or sixth purpose, it may not have been created to achieve what you're trying to extract from it. So I think the data that we really have to work with are our comments from public hearing, because that's what this has been set up to do, the professional perspective from the various departments and what their processes are right now, the impacts that we can see and take away, because to, Meredith's point, okay, the intake on one of these projects, I think we're going to talk about these later, is 20 days, and one is a 176 days. And then it goes back to the question I had earlier for Hassan. It's okay, if most of the review from DPS is for commercial projects, when you include independent residential projects or smaller scale projects, maybe that has something to do with the amount of time that is required. The commentary that we're getting back, honestly, and I'll say this as a third party, too, feels a little like it's defensive. And I don't think that this environment is meant to be that. A lot of the letters that, we were reading, you're like, I support, park and planning, and let's keep it independent. And it makes me feel, as someone who's not in either of those departments, that there's some underlying thing that the public is seeing from this process that is not what it was intended to be in the first place. So I think it would be important for us to just kind of like stick to the nuts and bolts of what we are getting from our public comment and not try to dig too much into the weeds, because it seems like they're happy with the process from what we've received, right? If we go outside of that, then we are speculating based on data that may not have been created for us to speculate over. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Sharice. Tim?
Sure. I think, I'll preface this. I have a certificate. From Villanova University. I've got a lean Six Sigma green belt. And so I don't really care too much about, what the politics of different departments might be. I think, with that training, the use of the data can help identify problems in your workflow or processes that you can look and engage in continuous improvement. And so, I offered that analysis because that's the right kind of tool to utilize this great data, is to help identify where some pain points are. And I think, to Sharice's point, you also need to consider the comments that you're getting from, Lean Six Sigma. It's used in healthcare to improve patient outcomes. It's used in manufacturing to improve the quality of your vehicle. Governments use it to improve their processes. And so one of the key tenets of Lean is that you get down to the people that are doing the work, that are working on the processes. So the developer is part of this process. The intake technician is part of this process. And you need to listen to them and see what they're saying, and then you need to look at the data, and when you have those two line up, then you've got something that, okay, I need to understand the root causes of why this is happening. And then you go back to those frontline people and you work together, and they're the ones that are going to come up with the best solution on how to streamline something. And so we've also heard from the folks that have commented, we've heard that intake is an issue. And that's why, and planning tracks this for this purpose. They have an intakes days. And so the data that they have in their data set has an intake days field. And that's where a lot of the data comes from in that analysis. So if we look at it and we see a histogram, and it was just based off of buckets, 7 days here to make a week, just so it could be meaningful to us. If the histogram showed that, all of your intake was happening bunched up at the left side of the graph, then perhaps there's a disconnect between the perception of the frontline worker and what's actually happening, because that would indicate things are actually moving pretty smoothly. But when you have an average, and you're using the average to measure that, the problem is average is a measure of central tendency. There's going to be lots that are much larger and lots that are much less. And that's why the histogram is such a powerful tool to identify a problem. Do you have a problem? I mean, and then work together on a root cause to address it. And there's so much, the notion behind this is it's got to be continuous improvement. You can use those histograms well beyond this work group. You can use it, on a monthly or a quarterly basis our process was moving smooth, and then all of a sudden something happened. It doesn't look like it's so smooth anymore. Why? So I think, what I'm hearing from the folks and from Fred and from Sharice and from Robert, I agree. We got to use the data. It is the right data. And using the right tool to analyze it and combining that with the input that we're hearing from the public, now we're on to something, and let's focus on the things that we see from the histograms, and that when they line up with the public, that's where we ought to direct our attention. And there's so many other tools beyond just the histogram when we get into it. And so maybe I'm a nerd, maybe I'm a geek, but I think I love this stuff. I think it's such a powerful tool to help us. That's like when we talk about what recommendations we're going to be writing. That's going to be one of mine. We ought to be engaging upon a continuous improvement process with Lean Six Sigma, and bring in, there's black belts who are, green belt is just, okay, I know enough, I got the certification, I've used it at work. There's black belts that help folks do this, and see dramatic improvements. And I really think we ought to be going along that approach. And so, I just offer that just as a geeky engineer and not a political person.
And if you want to learn more about Lean Six Sigma after this session, grab Tim by the coffee machine. So let me give Robert and/or Patrick a quick chance to respond, and then I'd really like to shift gears where the three of you, Tim, Hassan, and Robert, can go through real projects and look at some of the issues that we're actually talking about here. Patrick.
Yeah, thank you. Patrick Butler here for the Planning Department. I know it sounded like we only had like 10 or 15 minutes to review, so I'm just going to quickly summarize our 8-page memo here. We have no problem looking at data and analyzing it as has been suggested. Our issue was that the data appeared to be inaccurate, both in terms of the source in at least one instance, and then how it was presented was very confusing, seemed to be misleading. So our concern was that we coordinate better ahead of time to avoid these situations and make sure that the public, community members, anybody watching is, again, being this data that's represented, we can all verify its integrity and that we can be assured that it's accurate. So that was it. That was the summary, short and sweet of the 8-page memo.
And I think that echoes what Neil is asking for. Well, you're asking for like databases synced, which is going to take much longer than this work will be active.
Yeah, I took what Neil was saying was there a way for the other county agencies to pull together a dashboard that represented the whole permitting, use and occupancy certificate, that whole process in the same way that we are representing our development review data with the planning department. But
and to be clear, I'm fine with histograms too. I'm fine with analyzing the data however we analyze it. What I'm trying to get at is let's have objective data, and like Sharice pointed out, let's not have subjective data or data that is potentially being used subjectively. Let's have an objective mind frame. That's what I was getting towards.
Right. So let's shift gears. I appreciate, one more comment, quick.
Well, thank you very much, Patrick. Is that a commitment for us all to sit down together and go over the data and produce the appropriate spread of where the problems are and using your data? Well, you all work it out. I don't do data, okay? But certainly on the executive side, we would certainly, love to meet and go over the data. We had understood when you all said, there's the data, feel free to use it, but we understand now how concerning that was to you, and we would like to work on that.
Just a response. That's always been our commitment from day one. So let's use the E-plans information because that's public, it's transparent, and it's accessible by everyone. So you use that and I think to the other points, let's not manipulate it to find one point. Let's look at it so that we find a common issue. And again, each plan tells a story, and I think we'll see that in some of the projects today.
So let's shift gears and do that, but I think it's important in preparation for future meetings that when there's a need for a meeting to kind of get a kind of a collaborative, collective viewpoint across the agencies that we're talking about, that those meetings happen in between so that when we're coming into this work group meeting, we know that it's been vetted in that way and therefore it's getting presented in that way. All right? Okay, so Robert, I've got your slides here that I can put up, or your collective slides. I'm not sure how you want to do this, but for all three of you, just make sure that you're using your microphones when it's your turn to speak. So let me just bring up the slides here real quick.
And I'm not quite sure with, that we coordinated, Tim and Hassan and I, about how we're going to present this, but, okay, I can take the lead and they can fill in where appropriate.
All right, and you actually can control the slide deck if you
Oh,
want.
nice.
I believe you can.
Everybody have that up? I see it's on the big screen. Is that okay? Can you see it up there? Good. So thanks for letting us take a few projects and do some case studies. We picked 3 projects that have been built over the last 5 years. Some are under construction, some have gone through and have filed for permits. And this was jointly done by both planning, DPS, and DOT. And just want to point out that, we went into this with really the idea and the purpose, which I think is everyone's talking about, was really to show a combined timeline, because we heard early on, what is the combined timeline for a project? From pre-planning, which is kind of the NRIFSD stage that we track, all the way to when they pull a permit. And really identify some areas where there might be some, common areas of conflict, and explain how the issue was resolved, and just pointing out that, every project that we come across has some kind of conflict that we have to deal with, and that's what yes, ma'am.
Can you move the slides so that
Oh,
the
I'm
people
sorry.
online can see them?
I'm sorry. How's that?
Yeah.
There, thank you.
You're welcome.
And again, I think it underscores the collaboration and the work that we do together as agencies. And then identify any consistent, as we're calling them, pain points in the process. And I think a lot of these pain points are common, and they're common issues that we deal with on every project. Some are not as common as others, but they all kind of, the idea is to come to a resolution so that we can move the project along. And just pointing out that these were random projects that we picked out, just looking at different timelines. And they don't, they're really just intended to kind of show the collaboration between the groups, and again, as we've noted, identify some of the pain points. So the first one is a project that is nearly complete, and it's in downtown Bethesda. We wanted to give you a little context on the slides. It came in as 7359 Wisconsin Avenue. It's the marketing name for it is Avocet Towers. The plan numbers are listed on each of these, and it's located in downtown Bethesda along Wisconsin Avenue and on the south side of Montgomery Avenue. So both Montgomery Avenue and, Wisconsin is a state road. I believe that section of Montgomery is state as well, but definitely some coordination with DOT on some of the bike issues. So I'm getting a nod from Tim that yes, both are state roads. So the description, this shows you what was approved with the project, how big the project is, and the zoning. CR stands for commercial residential, and the numbers after that give you the allowable floor area ratio or amount of development that could be achieved that is mapped. H means height. So this is a 250-foot tall building in Bethesda. And it was reviewed under the 2017 Bethesda Downtown Plan and the Bethesda Overlay Zone, which had certain recommendations in it and different provisions in the overlay zone. And just to point out, in terms of context, this was the site of the police station in downtown Bethesda that eventually was moved, I think, to, not Fairmont, but Rugby. Thank you, Amanda. And then I think one of the things that was really addressed here was the Montgomery Avenue bike lane. And I think that was one of the pain points when we're talking about infrastructure improvements when you're bringing in a new plan. So what we did here on the next page was really identify the timelines, the both planning and permit timelines. We started with when it was submitted, but we also went to the NRIFSD, which is a plan that's submitted always before an application is accepted. So this gives you kind of a history. All three applications were reviewed and approved at the same time. So all three applications, sketch, preliminary, and site, were done within 140 days. You can see the date of the resolution, which memorializes that approval by the planning board, and then a certified site plan approval that came afterwards. So relatively fast, I think, in terms of the overall process. And then below that, we listed when the right-of-way permit was submitted and approved, same with sediment control and with building permit. The overall timeline, and again, this is what we have that is, it's data collection that we have from 8/2, which is the date that the NRIFSD was accepted, all the way to, I picked the first where the building permit was submitted in 20. So that gives you a range of roughly 3 years for that application. And again, there's a lot that goes on in between that in terms of plan preparation by the applicant, plan review. So not all that information is taken in here, but we did want to give you kind of an overview of that, that overall timeline. So I'll let Hassan or Tim add to that before we get into some of the.
Sure, and we're kind of making up the process
Yes,
as we
we are.
go, because we literally were working all night. So, I mean, just to kind of go on to the pain points and you know, what we struggle with collectively as we're trying to go through this. And I can speak to the, you know, it's kind of the bikeway issue on this particular one, you know, because there was a very experienced developer who knows how to get things done on this project. But there were challenges, though, because 2 state roads, and we had, you know, there are lots of master plans. We say we're going to review for the master plan, but you've got to work with so many, you know, you've got an overlay zone, you've got the master plan for the area, the sector plan, you've got the, you know, functional plans, which is whether it's master plan of highways and transit ways. And through the development of this particular project, a brand new functional master plan came into being. It was the bicycle master plan. And so we were all struggling as kind of a project team, because at the same time that this developer was working here to implement, you know, their frontage improvements, and they were required to implement a certain type of bike facility on Montgomery Avenue, you know, a 2-way cycle track. And then, you know, they get their approvals, and then the bicycle master plan comes out, and DOT comes in because we see this work going on. We want to continue it on the other side of Montgomery so that it's not a dead end cycle track. We want to build the whole cycle network, and it was a good opportunity. At that time, the pedestrian master plan, or sorry, the bicycle master plan comes out and changes some things and calls for a protected intersection at this location. And there's a challenge also with the 2-way cycle track and how the signals operate, and State Highway Administration in the Maryland Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices doesn't play well with a 2-way cycle track and the way you have to signalize the intersection. And so there was a lot of work and coordination, and because the master plan had changed, but you know, we were only a few months behind the developer. When we came with our project before the planning board, we were asked to do something different than that developer had been asked to do. And we collaborate. We said, okay, we'll work it out. We'll roll up our sleeves. We'll get to work. But it took a couple years of coordination with that developer during construction. in order to get them to change their plans, there was, kind of financial deal that had to be worked out between the, Montgomery County and the developer. Developer had to rip out work that had already been built. When they did that, we discovered there was an issue with where the fire hydrants were located, that, they had to, go back and get their fire access. I personally think everyone should have caught it with their original plan, but the cycle track prevented a fire truck from pulling up right next to the fire hydrant. And so that had to be amended and kind of dealt with when we got into the detailed plan. And so there a lot of complexity. And I think it just speaks to the challenges we face when, a developer is trying to develop a project. They're trying to comply with the master plan as it exists when they start. And things are going to change because, we go on a regular cycle to update the master plans. And this is an example of one that kind of got caught in that trap.
Yeah, and if I could just maybe put a little perspective on it, because when a master plan comes in, we try to incorporate the most recent information, whether it's from the bicycle master plan or from some other functional master plans. And the master plans are not intended at all to get into a level of detail that says this is exactly what you need to do on this street, for accessibility, for whatever it might be. And that, I think, is when you get to more of the planning and the review and the permitting stage, things do change. I mean, we've seen changes by SHA for their intersections and for their curbs and their ramps. I mean, I think we saw it change 3 times down in Silver Spring by our old office over probably a course of 5 or 6 years. So things do change, and I think some of that is to address accessibility, ADA accessibility, but also kind of the new thinking. We've had changes in thinking for shared use paths, for cycle tracks and whatever they get called these days, whether they're cycle tracks or separated bike lanes or protected bike lanes. So there's a lot that goes into not only the master plan thinking, but then when you get into the detail functions of it, there's a lot of coordination that has to happen. I think not just with the agencies, but with the development community as well, because there's a lot that happens in terms of how they access their site, how they're loading their site. And that again is part of the review process. Some of that does carry on where you have a design, and sometimes that changes a little bit when you get to permit. We don't like that to happen. I don't think anyone likes that to happen, but it does once you get into a little bit more detail. And I listed a few other things on here I think that could be common for a lot of the projects that we review. When you have redevelopment in a downtown like Bethesda, Silver Spring, Wheaton, even Pike District, where we're seeing a little bit more urban scale, you have sites that are challenged when they come, into being with not only access, but ADA access, fire department access, loading. And I mean, these are all key things I think that become part of the pain points that we, on a very regular basis, deal with. And it's new development in a downtown that probably didn't address those things. Even stormwater that probably wasn't addressed 50 years ago the way it is today. Not probably, it wasn't. So, I mean, I think those are things, and we wanted to share this with you to say these are some of the common issues that we see. And I think that was part of the exercise today for this group to really say this is what we review, this is what the agencies, the development community kind of sees on a very regular basis, and how we work together to resolve them. So Hassan, did you have anything else you wanted to add to that?
Just the only thing I was going to add, there are a couple of typos. I just want to correct them.
Oh.
If you go to the next slide, I think our right-of-way time, it took actually, if you go 2019, so it took 300 business days, but there is a reason for that. Really, the permit came in, it didn't come into us till January of 2019. So they come and apply for a right-of-way permit, but they didn't submit any plans or anything for 5 months, which is 150 days. You take that from the 300, so really the right-of-way permits, what we had, it went through 5 cycles of review. Approximate time for us was 100 days, 200 days for the applicant. So that's why it took 300 days. But really, if you take that 150 days down, so it went pretty quick. The timeline for the issuance of this permit, it's a commercial building permit, CR and height Robert says 250. I think it's the tallest building in the county, if not mistaken. You would know better than me.
It's close, it's one of the tallest.
One of the
yeah.
tallest. I mean, over 20 stories.
I think Marriott's the tallest.
So so I just wanted you guys to understand the magnitude and complexity of some a project of that magnitude that comes in for a commercial review, structural. So you see, it's 250 feet. It's approved, and I don't know what was at the end, what the height was on it. But that was allowed by Park and Planning.
It was 250.
250. So there you go, 22. So yeah, they want to get every inch. So that's the understanding. So the building permit is also for commercial. It came in on 6/19/2019 and was issued on 3/2/22. So, I mean, 174 business days. I think that's outstanding, something like that. Sediment control, 137. I just wanted to point that out. Again, not any issues from the standpoint of site issues, storm drainage, right away, with the exception of the bike path. So other than that, I don't think we have any other comments on that. For us, was pretty good. It went pretty smooth.
So just one quick comment, because I think this goes back to Sharice's comment earlier, which is certain projects of significant complexity or significant size can be quite different from smaller, right? So, I mean, that's part of what we're trying to reconcile here as we're thinking about improvements, right? So I think we just need to keep in mind that the range of types of projects that go through this overall process. I know Meredith had a quick question, and then Amanda, quick
Yeah,
question,
I
and
have
then let's move to the second.
I have a quick question. When you're going over these projects, can you identify whether it was the standard development review process or whether you were using one of the expedited processes, either for, biotech or the signature, just so that we know?
It was speed. This one was a speed to market. So when you see all three go together, Meredith, that means it's a consolidated process.
So this was speed to market?
Yep.
So, okay, well, that's, I'll say later, maybe we can find out how many projects are speed to market. And that's why I say, that I just want to know more, but thank you. I just wanted to know, if you'll identify each one, then it's more understandable.
That's helpful context, for sure. Amanda, quick question.
Well, first, I was just going to say, I think you think it's taller because it's 250 feet, but then it has a 40-foot structure on top of that, so it appears taller. But, so just for comparison and to put it in perspective, so this took about 2.5 years from, submittal date to building permit. How does that compare to like what the expectations are, or what the aspirations would be for a project of this complexity, considering all the things that you talked about? Are we considering this like pretty good in terms of a timeline, or, could be better in some regards?
I'll speak for the planning side, but I would think that both planning and permitting would say this is pretty good. It's pretty quick. One thing I would probably underscore here, and I could probably get the development community with nodding, saying this doesn't account for all the work where they're coming in to talk to us ahead of time, or they're talking to different agencies, or they're preparing their own feasibility studies as to what can happen to try and figure out how to make the project work so that when they do submit it to us, it's in a format that, I think would be acceptable with some minor tweaks where we have these discussions. And that could be, that may be a couple years that they're working on it to get it to that point.
Only thing I would add is that I think it's really important that you all kind of came up with identifying common pain points, just so that we can keep that thread throughout this process.
Sure.
Why don't we move to the second one?
Great.
Or unless you have more to say about this.
Oh, I'm sorry. I probably should have put this slide up earlier. This is just a plan view of the one on the left is really the building itself with the plaza out front. It's the same project. And then you can see the bike lane. It's kind of got a separated median along. It's running east to west on this orientation. And then a little bit more of a detail about the bike lane and where that was accounted for on Montgomery Avenue.
Not exactly the way it got built. We talked about why.
Yeah, we
but-
did. We did.
But, you know,
Thank you.
I think that's what they submitted
Yes.
initially.
Yeah. So the next project, and Tim and Hassan, you jump in where you need me to, but or where you need to, but I'm going to move ahead with the next one is our old planning office down in Silver Spring, 8787 Georgia Avenue, and it's located at the intersection of Spring Street and Georgia Avenue. You can see the sketch, preliminary, and site plan numbers up on top, and the description about what was or what's being built right now. They've topped out, and they're well into the construction phase in terms of probably delivering, my guess would be later on this year. 400 units and commercial development. I think it's going to be a grocery store at the corner. You can see the size, and then in this case, the zoning, a little bit less than the last site. The H, which is the height, is 90 T. T is a remnant of the old zoning ordinance, and even with this one here, where you can get additional height if you provide additional affordable housing. And this was reviewed under the 2000 Silver Spring Sector Plan. Since that time, the sector plan has been updated. It got approved last year. And in this case, I think some of the key components that were part of it was a mid-block connection that connected Spring Street really down through Fenton, kind of what we called Fenton Extended, all the way down into the Fenton Village area, and then significant streetscape improvements and open space. And so the next slide really just is the same information that we had. So I didn't have as much information on this one in terms of the intake days and the review days, because this was not part of the dashboard since it was a 2017 plan, but we got as much information as we could to give you kind of a timeline. And this timeline, I think one of the key components to it as to why it probably took so long is because that site was combined with this site here in Wheaton. So we had to move into this site before that one could get redeveloped. And I think there was a lot of lag time between how that happens, on just a physical and operational move standpoint. But I think you can see the timelines for not only the planning side of it. They started back in 2014 with their NRIFSD. Plan submittals for the sketch came 3 years later. So there was a lag time between when it was when the NRIFSD was done before they actually submitted plans. And then right-of-way permits, sediment control, and building permits came within the last 2 years. And I don't know if Hassan, Tim, you want to add anything to that before we get to kind of some of the discussions on pain points?
I'll wait for the pain points. I advanced too much.
So was this done by the regular process, or was this speed to market?
Well, this was, the name Speed to Market was not in existence in 2014, or maybe not even 17, but it went through a sketch plan, and so the answer is no, because it went through a sketch plan approval first, and then a year later, essentially came in and submitted for a subdivision and a site plan. So, no, it was not.
Charisse?
I'm over here sidebarring with Kate. So the sketch plan approval, as it compares to site plan approval, as it compares to design review negotiations, where is there some opportunity to get more information in the sketch plan approval that seems like it's coming up further down the line and creating a bottleneck of things that may not have been thought of in the beginning?
Good question. So sketch plans, the intent of the sketch plans is to be much more conceptual in nature. Provide massing, kind of your overall allowed density, and really focus on some of the public benefits. So part of I think part of the importance of the sketch plan is to get as much as you can in terms of approvals and guidance, but some of that does get pushed off to a more detailed review at subdivision and site plan. So part of that's intentional because you're looking at kind of an overall massing and you're not looking at very detailed design at the time. That's probably why sketch plans are submitted earlier on, because they're really looking at a bigger vision picture that's intended to be in concert with a master plan, or maybe something that is a functional plan or another type of design guideline. And I think the ones that we see where the sketch plans are submitted concurrently, a lot of that detail's been worked out, and it's just might as well go ahead and submit all three of those together so that we can review everything in concert. But, if there's, with a lot of the sketch plans, there are things that are kind of put into a parking lot to address at later applications. So hopefully that answers your question. No?
Was your question around, is there some way of syncing them more closely together, and rather than doing them fully sequentially, or?
Or maybe just, I don't know, encouraging in that story that Tim told is heart-wrenching, right? Like, you get all the way to that, part of the process, and then you start ripping things out because it's not approved or acceptable. I mean, those are things that would be a turnoff, I would think, to people wanting. So, if some of the higher level pain points are things like bike lanes and ADA compliance, things that people are paying more attention to now, where, to your point, master plan from 20, 30 years ago wouldn't have had any of that stuff because no one was thinking about, the bikes are going to have their own lane, So in the sketch plan part of things, even though it's high level conceptual, if there's some consideration for some of these items that come up and create larger problems later on, maybe that can be a way to resolve those higher level issues.
And I think this is a good example of where the sketch plan identified, here's my mid-block connection that does provide that thoroughfare basically between Spring Street all the way down to Fenton Village, but it didn't lay out every single piece of the detail. And you had a bike lane that was going down the middle of that, and so there was some architectural treatments that were being done, urban design treatments being done to make that happen that weren't ready at the time of sketch plan. And so I think it's good to highlight those, and it took a while to get them to for the resubmittal to come in to actually address every single one of those. And I think at this point, there was also discussion about access along Spring Street and along from Planning Place. And sometimes we're not always in agreement with the applicant, and I think even internally as to what the details of those should be. And so sometimes you have to punt it to another plan to say, you need to study this, you, the applicant, or the agencies need to study it a little bit further before we actually take that next step.
So Neil, and then
There was Amanda, but.
Oh, I'm sorry. Neil, then Amanda, and then I also want to give us a 5-minute break before we go to project number 3. But why don't we make sure that we cover all the pain points from this project before we do that? Neil, then Amanda?
So Cherise beat me to it a little bit in her comments, but how often does a 20-year-old master plan or sector plan get in the way of development that's occurring 20 years after it was generated? I mean, in some cases, we have almost 30-year-old master plans in the county, and if they're not up to date with what's going on code-wise, I mean, that's got to lead to a nightmare from a process standpoint.
I do think that can be a big issue. I think the Silver Spring Master Plan had some pretty good guidance in it. And, when we take plans to our planning board and we have discussions, sometimes you have to make a general conformance finding that says, here's the language in the master plan. Things have changed, but it's still, I think the vision is still in place. We have had some older master plans that were 30 years old where we said, it's time. It's a challenge when you go back through and start creating a different vision because so much has changed in 30 years. But it's a good point. I mean, it's something that we do struggle with, and I think the applicant side struggles with, even the public, to say, here's recommendations. How do we make that work with what they're proposing? Because the proposal originally 20 years ago might have been the thinking was maybe it's commercial, and today it's probably more residential, and so it's a different type of review, but it's a different type of expectation, I think, going
I mean,
in.
so much has changed in 30 years, so much has changed in
In
3
10,
years. You
5.
know what I mean? It's
Right.
been a crazy couple of years. but
Right.
That's my comment.
Amanda?
I just wanted to note that for sketch plan, that gives the community an opportunity to weigh in and provide comments before plans are sort of more fully baked, because once they get to site plan, if people have comments, we're often told like, too late.
Too late,
You know,
right.
sometimes even at sketch plan, we're told, it's a little too late, but at least they are, you know, it is more conceptual. There are these sort of issues getting worked out, so that can be considered, you know, through the process. So just wanted to
Really
note
helpful
that.
point, thank you. So why don't we shift fully to pain points discussion, the three of you, anything you want to say about this particular project, and then quick comments on that, 5-minute break, then we'll go to project number 3.
Go ahead, Tim.
So I think, Robert mentioned the kind of the mid-block access and, things that are like great urban design features. This was a case where that kind of butts up against some of the code requirements and required some creativity on part of the agencies. Planning Place is a public street to a point. And this mid-block access, developer, and it's a great urban design, have it go through all the way to, from George Avenue all the way to Spring Street, break up that block size and make it more walkable. And the problem is, there wasn't room in the site to meet some of the code requirements. When a public street dead ends, you got to have a turnaround. It's for fire and rescue and stuff like that. You can't trap that fire truck in there. They're not they're not allowed to back up so far. So depending on the length of that street, you either have to have a cul-de-sac or a hammerhead, and that was not compatible with the vision for this site. And so I think what the ultimate resolution was in this instance was to do something creative and create, a public access easement, so that, the idea that, some developer in the future couldn't shut off that public access and block it off, so that, a large vehicle that went down there like a fire truck can continue through to the other side and get out, and also, be in the right place where they need to be to set up and respond to an emergency in that building. So I think that kind of highlights some of the, there's always going to be, what's a great idea from an urban design concept versus what we have to do to comply with the life safety code versus what we have to do to comply with the road code. It's just another one of these complex examples. I think DOT was very creative in trying to accept this public access easement in order to make the concept work. I think there were also some stormwater management issues, especially, and I think that's going to be a problem in a lot of urban areas. Well, anywhere. I mean, there's just not enough room to do what needs to be done.
That's
in a
why
lot
we
of
have
places.
Mark here. Mark is the master.
So I can't remember the specifics. I don't know if you want to share those.
Yeah, sure, because there were some challenges.
Sure.
With stormwater management at the concept and then later on. So, thank you.
Yeah, I'm Mark Etheridge. I manage the Water Resources section for DPS. There were certainly, I would call them, that's very accurately described as pain points when it comes to the stormwater management design for this one. Very dense, very complicated site, not a lot of room to move. When the engineer did his stormwater concept and submitted that to us and we got that approved, they had made some errors in their design assumptions. They found out later when they came to submit the detailed plans for review, which caused us to have to go back and revise the stormwater concept again. And when you make revisions on something that's this tight and this complex, you start bumping into other people's responsibilities. It didn't really affect anything with planning staff, but we started bumping into a TEEC's public storm drain, trying to fit alternative methods of stormwater in. So there was a process of getting that conceptual plan redesigned and then getting the detailed plans in for review with so little room to really design the stormwater was a very difficult challenge for the engineer and for us. The engineer was probably not the best at getting the plans prepared adequately. I think they got in a hurry and probably submitted some plans on the basis of their schedule rather than when the plans were actually going to be
ready for approval a few times. But it was a long process. Really wasn't anything endemic with park and planning and that coordination. It was just really an engineering effort that caused the pain points with that one.
Great, thank you. Nathan, I know there's a slide in here
No,
about.
this is Atik Panshir. I'm the public right-of-way manager with DPS. I agree with Mark. Public right-of-way is very limited. So it's very difficult and challenging to fit everything within the public right-of-way. So it was a really heartache for all of us to manage it. We made some concessions and we got it done. We got it done. So it's working. It's still the last minute, was it a couple weeks ago? They encounter a utility box, so they had to shift again. So there's always a challenge, just not easy. Yeah. Thanks.
Isfan, I know there's a slide on permitting. Do you want to speak to that at all?
If there is any question, so the permitting again on this one, it went pretty smooth. 100 business days they came in. Once they had the certified site plan, I believe after a few months they came to DPS to obtain the building permit. Came in March 25 of 2022, and the permit was issued on 8/12, 101 business days. Like I said, the issue sediment control took a little bit of time, and again, that goes to the challenges that was raised because of the storm water issues and the storm drainage system. The conflicts and the issues that raised, but still it took 4 reviews, which is not bad. DPS time, average time to review per cycle 21 days, applicant 35 days. So overall, what I'm saying, with the exception of, again, you have a project that you're trying to fit a lot of stuff, and there are existing utilities, and some of these issues are going to come up with these types of projects.
Just a quick comment. What's nice about this slide to me, again, it's not understanding this fully, is seeing how these 5 different timelines, or four timelines underneath the main timeline, kind of sync together, how they fit together. It's a helpful way to kind of see the full process and what contributes to the days. So it's a nice presentation of the data. Neil, and then Livu.
I'll be brief. I just think that this is a good case for underscoring lead agency and making sure that different agencies are coordinating amongst themselves, because as the people who have to solve these problems, every square inch of our job has a use or a prohibitive use, and it means that we can't put something here, and it's very difficult to make that all work. And there are cases where we simply have 2 competing uses, and we can't solve that. We need the agencies to do that. And I think that's where the lead agency document comes into play, and getting more, a refresh on that, I think, would be very helpful.
Yeah, and we talked about that last time, so that's an extra emphasis there on that point. Thank you. Livu?
Even better. I have a very quick question, because I don't think we've talked about it in this work group yet. What was HHS's review on this one? I know the last one had a hotel, but.
I'll have to defer to Hassan on that one.
I have to, again, that's a good question, Lifu. I have to look, unless there is a restaurant or something that associates. So remember, there are 3 buildings over there, and this is just one of them. So yeah, I have to look into it and get back to you.
Hassan, are they part of every review, though?
They are part of every
So
review.
3 days is pretty,
Probably a quick checkbox.
is probably a quick checkbox,
No
would be my
comment.
guess.
I mean, one final comment before we go to a real 5-minute break, is, to me, my observation on these first 2 projects is they're very tied to economic development in the county, right? These are significant projects, and which I think is one of the main impetuses for creating this group in the first place, is how do we do these for projects that have a significant impact on economic development. So,
Did we clarify if this one was speed to market as well?
It was not.
It was not, okay.
all right, let's take a 5-minute break. On my phone, I've got 11:24, coming back at 11:29. We'll hear about Project 3 and then open discussion about what we see as areas in general to improve. Thank you.
Robert go?
I think he's out, he was out in the hall.
He was just here.
Yeah.
Kids that are like 12ers, I mean,
You know, a lot's gonna go over their head.
I live out that way, I live in Laurel.
References.
In Laurel.
Like, I think
Yeah.
you had to have like.
Well, and that was the thing,
All right, folks, we're officially starting again. Going to be looking at the third project example. You know, one rule of thumb for facilitators is the +5 rule, which is that when you give a break of a certain amount of time, you know it's going to be at least 5 minutes above that. And you guys have fulfilled your obligation to that today, so appreciate it. All right, so back to the presentation team on flats at Knoll Station.
All right, well, I will finish this one off and then turn it over. I know there were a lot of discussions on this plan, and on this plan, you'll see the plan numbers up on top, which A stands for amendment after each one of these, and I need to explain that a little bit because some of the timing is indicative of an initial plan approval that resulted in an amendment for various reasons. This is a project, residential project in Kensington and on Summit Avenue. And you can see the amount of density that is included with this. This one is a little, had some nuances to it because there's a density transfer, which means that there is another property that is basically sending some of their density to this site, which is permitted by the zoning ordinance under certain provisions. And so, this is what they're doing. The original approval was for multifamily units. This developer came back in afterwards to change that to include live-work units. It does include a little bit of commercial in it, and it's under an acre. You can see the zoning, which is a little bit more, a CRT zone is commercial residential town with a much lower density than what you've seen with the other ones. A big part of this, you had pedestrian and open space facilities, a lot of discussion about stormwater and storm drain, which is common, I think, in the Kensington area. And then also, this was reviewed under the 2012 Kensington Sector Plan. Next slide. So just an overview of the development itself. It's, in comparison to the other ones, it's a much smaller development. Access, or at least frontage on both Knowles Avenue and Summit Avenue. And then this slide shows you where the loading dock is, some of the key points of access and entry. And then as we go into a little bit on the plan and permit timelines, so the submittal date we have here was March of '22. And just keeping in mind that the original application on this was submitted in 2020 with an approval in '21. They ended up going through and getting their original certified site plan done and then came back to amend the plan before they started any kind of, at least permit applications and so forth. The original NRI FSD, there was an exemption on this project, and so it was a pretty quick turnaround, which the exemptions have. That was approved back in 2018. So by the time, it took about 2 years for them to get the plan submitted, and the turnaround was roughly 7-8 months, a little over 8 months, I think, in terms of the original approval. And then the timelines for those are listed below. It did come back in as an amendment, as noted, to include a different use type. And so when you do that, there's definitely some discussions about how that changes zoning compliance, because live-work units need to have zoning compliance to make sure that they stay live, they stay work, because that equates to the zoning that they are allotted on the site. So this one, and I'm going to probably turn this over to Tim and Hassan, but this one had some concerns from the original approval on stormwater management and storm drain that had to get resolved when it was resubmitted. for the amendment. So you can see a pretty long lag time between when it was the submittal in '22, March of '22, and the acceptance was not until September of '22. And the main reason for that is because we were waiting for the applicant to reconfirm not only stormwater management approval, but storm drain adequacy for the site. And so we didn't feel like we could accept the application until they actually provided that, that confirmation. And then no permits have been issued on this yet. I do understand that permits have been filed. You can see that here, they were submitted, and I'm sure it's going through the process at some point here, but this is a little bit of a different application, and I think you can see some of the same points, though. The same pain points involve site access and loading. This one had a major component with storm drain analysis and stormwater management. And then also with the change in use, there's a different evaluation that comes into play. So I'll turn this to Hassan and Tim to maybe supplement to what I've already stated.
Sure.
Want me to go to the next slide, or are you good with this?
It's good, I think. So I think this marked a turning point in kind of the way some things are done, I think for the better.
Yep.
And so I guess the original application that was approved, DOT did not approve the storm drain, I think, in that letter. That's correct, Deepak?
No, DOT did approve it
they did.
because it was draining to a state highway system. So DOT did approve the storm drain, but it was going to a state system, so they need approval from the state for the existing storm drain.
And then I think there was some existing conditions that needed to be verified by the engineer that were not. And so when it came back in again, stormwater management became a real challenge because there was assumptions that were made based off of existing data. When the field verification was made to verify the pipe sizes that were there, then there were some big changes necessary for the stormwater management. And so I think, Robert mentioned at the beginning that, they delayed their acceptance date to make sure that everybody had the information that was necessary to do the kind of review that should be done. And I think that's the standard practice going forward. So,
Well, it has been, I think.
Yeah.
This one was elevated a little bit more because we had a lot of public involvement with
Yes.
it as well.
Yeah.
So, yes.
So I think was that all I was supposed to say on this?
And was this a speed to market, or to have any special designation? No?
Well, I think the original application was speed to market. I'm looking at Carrie, and I think it was speed to market because it had 35% affordable housing component to it. But I'm going to maybe have Carrie just answer that.
Thanks, Robert. Carrie Sanders, Division Chief, Mid-County. So this project had a lot of initial concept review that happened before the combined sketch, preliminary, and site. So it did have a lot of work that went ahead of it, which led to that combined review. But no, it didn't have sort of the traditional speed to market components.
Thank you. So I think overall you can see it's a longer timeline, and they haven't completed permitting yet at this point, but they're already 4 years in, but they have changed and amended the plan, and they've had to do some work on their own to move it ahead. So with that, maybe I can, unless there's some other questions, I think that. Wait. Sorry.
Anything for permitting?
This was the last slide.
Yeah, the building permit, it comes in, and as you see up there, the review that's going back and forth. Right now, it's at their hand. The issue with the stormwater and right-of-way is the storm drain capacity of the existing system. So that's the one that really has created all the issues. And I don't know where we are are we at the point that it's possible to get this thing approved pretty soon? Or
We've already revised the stormwater concept to provide additional controls on site to reduce the 10-year flow to an acceptable level under the approval of the DPS right-of-way staff. So that part's done. They're just waiting on other aspects of the plan to get approved.
I'm sorry, the sediment control permit, there has been an approval, a review that got approved for rough grading only. But we have not issued the permit even for that because we need approval from the state of Maryland. They need to give us a notice of intent. And there's also, we need confirmation that the surety for the site plan has been accepted. And I don't think the applicant has provided that. I know he hasn't provided it, and it could just be that they're not ready to move forward.
I think both of us have not approved it.
They haven't, the site plan's not approved, and I'm looking at Carrie again. Have they submitted the site plan? Just yes or? No. No, not been certified, so.
So it cannot be issued till the plans are certified.
So again, I think, with, one of the messages here is it's been delayed, but it's something that there were some very significant issues that needed to be resolved. And I think it shows kind of not only on the county level, but on the state level as well, to address some of the storm drain issues that were occurring out here that needed to be verified.
So let me just, go ahead, Tom.
Just a question on that. So how do you interact with the state? Because they're not always like terribly responsive in a lot of areas. But I mean, how does that work when you have a stormwater project like that? And I guess it's just the one road is a state road.
Right, one state, one is county.
Okay, so it's across 3 agencies then for that coordination and.
Well, and the state is part of our DRC in our whole development review approval and part of the permitting approval as well. So they do get engaged. I mean, I think it's a matter of, the level of detail at the time to make sure that we address the issues.
Okay.
Steve?
Steve, you got some?
So, yeah, go ahead, Neil.
Well, I do know with sediment control and state highway and SWIM, the state and the county does a good job of partitioning that scope so that SWIM is largely state highway and sediment control is largely the county. So I think you guys do a good job of keeping that separate to keep the process moving along. I had a question, clarification. The storm drain analysis and SWIM concept approval is a need to do a reapproval, and I know that was an issue on another project. Was that primarily user error, more or less, on the applicant? Okay. So I think that underscores a real need to continue DPS's outreach for education, and you guys have been doing a really good job of that lately. So I think that's just more need for outreach and education.
Education of the applicant?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very tricky process, so
Yeah.
especially for the next wave of young designers. I mean, coming into Montgomery County fresh out of college, it's tough, so, yeah.
Charisse? And then Delegate.
So who bears the brunt of the expense for that type of stormwater management, where I think we talked about in a prior meeting, where the county and where the state step in to ensure the infrastructure in the area supports the growth and development that we all need generally, and the developers execute. I mean, but it's, you know what I mean? Like, so who takes on the burden of that type of cost in this process? Is it only the developer?
So I'm trying to understand the question. The cost of the improvements associated with that site and that development are borne by the developer. I think that's probably I think that's it. I mean, there's maintenance of the system once it's constructed, whoever constructs it, because a lot of it gets constructed by developers and then gets turned over either to the state or to DOT or to a municipality. Yeah. And so that ongoing maintenance it's the public. It's our responsibility to kind of keep that maintenance going. There are, for certain types of stormwater management features, and I'm probably getting a little outside of my depth, but I will say there are certain things that like a homeowners association would maintain versus the public maintaining on-site stormwater management ponds or stuff like that. And there are also programs, I think, to transfer that to public maintenance. And that's probably as much as I want to say, because I don't want to make a mistake, because I don't understand it completely.
I mean, the question is probably confusing because I'm confused in asking it. But essentially, if you look at areas that have not been developed, but we're talking about economic development and progress in our county. I guess I'm just kind of looking at what is the county doing to ensure that the infrastructure that needs to be improved upon, whether you're developing or not developing, like ultimately as we're growing and more people are moving here and roads are changing, you know what I mean? It's just, I'm trying to figure out where in the process is there capital improvement, right, of infrastructure that's general in scope to our area, so that when developers are coming, they're not having to kind of shoulder infrastructure improvement that probably should have been in place just to support the community at large. I think that's.
And you're mainly talking about up-county areas, I'm assuming here, or?
Or East County, as we
Yeah,
can
right.
discuss
Right,
later.
yes.
Yeah, but I mean, areas where they've been ag reserve, as, Robert was saying, or more rural in scope, but there's a lot of economic development happening. And yes, I'm not saying the developer shouldn't, contribute to the cost, but it seems like if you want people to come and develop an area, what are you contributing to that pot of money?
It sounds like this might be getting into adequate public facility ordinance. Robert, you may be better positioned to answer that question than me.
Well, I do think part of this does go into our adequate public facilities or our growth management, and that's incorporated into some of the master plans when we look at what an overall growth would be and what the needs might be. And that assessment is done by pretty much all the agencies to look at infrastructure. Not all of that is, doesn't happen overnight. It may, it gets put on a bucket list of things that need to occur and prioritized by the different agencies when they come through. So I think part of it is going to be at the master plan level, part as to identify kind of what the need might be. And then that would go through capital improvement program, like you mentioned, whether that's at a state level or at a county level. And I'm sure there's some
If I can,
interaction between the two.
yeah, Patrick Butler, if I can just jump into to round that out a little bit. It's really a combination of the two. So as Robert was saying, typically through the master plan process, we establish a vision for a particular area of the county. Within that master plan, we identify the infrastructure that would be necessary to support a level of development that is ultimately envisioned. And then through the development review process and implementing that vision, we do this through a combination of developer contributions, like you're describing, when there's a property that comes in for development, that we are implementing these facilities that were imagined by this plan and various plans. And then there are certain projects, for whatever reason, that may be identified that would be handled by the public through the CIP project. So it's really a combination of all those things working in concert.
And just to tack on one little thing.
So if I may.
Go ahead. I was just going to mention real quick that there are projects where a developer contributes, their development is contributing a portion of the need for that major capital investment. And so Montgomery County has, a subdivision roads participation capital improvements program. And so there may be an instance where, and there have been, I don't know how many hundred of these projects over the past however many years, where a developer is coming in and their development is having a certain impact. They're required to do a little bit of work, but it's not the full amount of work necessarily maybe for the region. And so we will enter into a participation agreement with that developer. They'll bring some of the funding, the county will bring the rest of the funding, and we will work together. Sometimes the developer will build it with county money, sometimes we'll build it with the developer money. I can think of lots of examples of that. Stringtown Road in Clarksburg is one, Watkins Mill Road in Gaithersburg is another. The one we looked at earlier today with the bike lane, the Avocet Tower, that's another one where your money exchanged hands, and we said, we're going to do this, you're going to do that. So to complete the network. It's something that we're working on constantly.
Yeah, if I may, in
Yeah,
addition
go ahead,
to that,
Diane.
what happens with the master plan along the lines of what Patrick was saying? what happens with the master plan when it's proposed, it goes over to the county executive who actually does an estimate of what all of the necessary infrastructure is going to cost and puts pricing on it. And based on that, DOT will also build out its CIP for upcoming years for some of these roads. So for example, for the White Flint sector plan, that's exactly what happened. And the county took on building a huge amount of the roads necessary for that whole economic development area to occur. And the county put in place the mechanism for funding for those. So it's not, it's something that's looked at all the time and every single year, and it's prioritized based on what the given needs are. It's prioritized, the county gives the state a listing of its priorities, and the county does its own priorities, so that when there's an area that looks like it is going to be going through growth, there is a means where the county is also investing heavily in the necessary infrastructure.
Great, thanks, Diane.
There's one more component that just was pointed out to me that I should mention. And it is a whole other complexity into itself, but, you know, a development, you know, when they're bringing in impacts, there's an impact tax, and they can get a credit of that tax if they are building transportation improvements that improve the capacity of the transportation network. So yes, the developer has to do it. They've got to get the money to front for it, but then they get a credit against their tax bill for that development. They get an impact tax credit. So that's another piece to the puzzle where, you know, they're paying for it, but then they're not paying taxes because they paid for it.
Great. So let me ask a question of everyone as we're transitioning to a broader conversation. Does anyone have any observations or insights, having listened to these three specific projects, that you'd just like to call out or identify based on what you heard from this joint presentation?
Before we do that, if I could, I have a question. It's a two-part question
Sure.
related to the state and the state's role in this process. So, Robert, I think I heard you say that the state comes in early, right? That the state is, did I hear you say that correctly? No. When does the state enter the process?
Well, so SHA enters the process with all the other agencies when we go through the development review evaluation or the whole process. So they have a seat at the table as a development review committee member right when the applications are filed. So when I say state, I'm particularly referring to State Highway Administration.
State Highway.
Yes.
And are there any other agencies in the state that are involved? Because we talked about stormwater management. Are there any other state in the process? Are there any other state agencies that would be involved in the process, like MDE or something like that?
MDE does get involved, yes. They don't typically participate in our DRC process, but they work through DPS when it comes to stormwater management and storm drain review. I would assume storm drain reviews, so no.
Okay, and then
stormwater
one,
management.
thank you.
DOT,
and-
thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And one final thing about that, as a follow-up, is that law, is that in law, or is it just a practice?
It's
Is there
in
any
law.
legal
It's
authority?
in law.
It is in law.
It is in law.
It's in law, and it's in law. I actually am preparing sort of a cheat sheet for everybody that is a table of who does what, and it has the I've been populating also where the authority comes from under the law.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Just
you,
one
Diane.
other thing, whenever I hear development and ag reserve, I get nervous. Just saying.
Great, thanks for those questions. So let me open it up. Does anyone have any observations they'd like to share in terms of what you heard across these three quite different, all complex, lengthy projects before we talk more broadly about development review?
Just a quick comment and question. So the sort of pattern I saw for pain points includes site access and then stormwater. For stormwater, can you speak towards this issue of stormwater waivers and how that comes into play and how that's part of the process?
I'm going to defer to Mark over here for that one.
Talk briefly about that. Now, stormwater management is is an environmental mitigation requirement that we're delegated through the Maryland Department of the Environment. And we deal with a portion of what's a statistical one-year storm event, which is 2.6 inches in 24 hours. So we're not talking about floods here, we're talking about environmental mitigation. And there are target treatment volumes that are created and calculated for each development. And they are required to try to treat those volumes through certain types of practices to the extent practicable. In some cases, especially on redevelopment projects, where there may be bad soils, there may be underground parking, there may be shallow storm drain and other kind of things, that's not possible to get the full treatment volume, and at least a partial waiver can be considered for that, for the stormwater management portion. Doesn't
Great,
have
thank
to do with conveyance through the storm drain system. For the storm drain system, we look at the 10-year storm, which is well above the environmental mitigation sizing. So we look at conveyance separately through the storm drain system, whether we're doing a waiver or not. I hope that's clear.
Answer your question. Other observations across the three projects? And this includes the three presenters too. Like you guys spent a lot of time on figuring out which projects to choose and what you were trying to highlight, and what observations might you have across the three?
I think the two were already noted. I do believe the site access is a common conflict that we see, especially when you're involving bike lanes, you're involving, development and loading. All of those things come into play when we evaluate a project, and they're in many respects conflicts because you have new development on a site that, that type of intensity wasn't there before, and so it's a different level of review, and that kicks in changes to stormwater management, changes to just about everything. But, I do think those two, maybe stormwater management, maybe site access and loading, we have a lot of discussions about building design. So when you get into building and public space design, and that informs one way or another site access and loading and stormwater management. So, sometimes there's conflict with that in terms of how the overall design comes in. So I would say at least those three I know are some of the pain points common.
Okay.
I guess once you look at the three projects, something that comes up in all three of them is the storm drainage, right-of-way issue, the permitting process, and also what's at park and planning, the DRC, all the conversation that goes. These projects went pretty well for most parts, but there were still some pain points and there were some issues maybe between us, but it got resolved. We talk about the road that went through 87 Georgia Avenue, really should have been a public road, but because of being able to get the project going and to fit everything, there are portions that are public, there are portions that become private. So those are the stuff that comes up. So, and I believe time and time again, when we look at these things, we need to look at the lead agencies. Conversation comes up, and I think discussion comes up, and I don't feel like the discussion or the side that planning is pushing, or DOT or DPS, it's not that somebody wants to force their input, or this is the way what I think it should be done. Those are the conversations to be had, absolutely, and we're not going to agree on everything, but I believe at the end, the decision's got to be made by the lead agency. And that's important to follow that. I think to get the lead agency meetings up and going again, when we have conflict like that, to get them more on regular basis, because we used to have them. I don't think we are having them the way it used to be. So really, these are good projects. We were able to resolve our issues, but as you know, there are projects that, not many, a few, but we are not able to resolve it to the best of our ability, and that's important to keep on our mind and push at the end. Really, let's respect the lead agency and go from there.
Great. Tim?
So, I think, site access and stormwater management, I think don't need to belabor that point. I'm trying to think of some additional layers that might be helpful for folks to consider. I think one would be recognizing the purpose of a master plan is to set out a vision. And sometimes in the achievement of that vision, when you get into the project level, you're going to get into the details, and the details are going to affect operations and how there's a transportation network. There's the big chunk of our economy moving back and forth, and keeping people safe, keeping people moving, keeping the buses going, having the fire access. Some of it is really getting into the operational, how that system operates. And to the point that Isan was making, that the lead agency memo, a lot of that operation comes to DOT or it comes to SHA. SHA has the rule, we talked about the traffic signals and the two-way cycle track and the modifications that they've made to the national MUTCD that make it difficult to implement a facility like that in Maryland. But they have that authority. It's their operational view of things. And so, I think the lead agency memo, the level of specificity in the master plans needs to be focused really on the vision, and there's got to be some deference to the operating agencies when it comes to how the system functions on a day-to-day basis.
And is SHA integrated into the lead agency memo currently? Like our state agencies?
I think they have. I think we have some categories that they're the lead agency on state roads. Yeah,
I'm pretty sure they are.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Neil, follow up?
Yeah, briefly. So we're looking at the projects that made it, that did pretty well. If we're looking for future scope, I mean, we probably want to look at projects that didn't make it, right? Like it's survivorship bias. Like in World War II, they looked at the planes that came back and they added armor where the bullet holes were, but those are the planes that made it back. Planes that didn't make it back, that's where they should add the armor. It's a metaphor. My point is, let's look at the projects that didn't go so well and figure out where the problems were there. That's probably more meaningful or as meaningful as the projects that did make it.
Great. Other observations, Sharice?
Okay, so a couple things to make one point. I was looking at the comments again. There was a comment from a Daniel Mayhair, I don't know. But the note he made in here, I think is pretty relevant to what I'm about to say. And he notes this example of staff modifying the law to fit the project rather than modifying the project to fit the law, as something that he'd like to see this work group address in its work. And so it was related to zoning. So when we were looking at these three projects, I only see one in here that addresses a pain point of zoning. The other two don't. But I understand typically that zoning is an issue that can belabor the process. So I'm just curious to hear, feedback in the room as to, is that something that we should also look at? Or are we seeking something that is not there, again, based on the data that we are reviewing right now?
I'll maybe defer to Lavu on the zoning part of it, but I'm happy. I have to digest the question first to figure out how to respond to that.
I'm going to be known as asking the most confusing questions ever.
Now, these are good questions.
No, I guess as a zoning nerd, my answer would be, so I'm guessing in this case, it was probably a zoning text amendment that would have had to be done, which is done by the council. Legally, the way ZTAs work is there's something called special legislation. So legally, we're not allowed to pass ZTAs that are only for one project. We're supposed to make sure any ZTA we do, any zoning change we do could have multiple people could benefit, and it could benefit the whole county. And I try very hard to stress that to council members. But it is true that usually the reason we notice that there's an issue in zoning is because there was a project that, for policy reasons or economic development reasons, the county really wants. So it is true that we'll hear about an issue from a developer, and that's what generates the ZTA. But it's supposed to be that it could benefit more than one person, and it could be a beneficial project. I say across the county, that could mean across the county, but only in certain zones. But I don't know if that answers the legal part of the zoning question.
I do think I've known Mr. Mayor for my 23 years here, and I think the project he's talking about had a 2000 master plan, and it was followed later by an overlay zone. And there was a little bit of a difference in the language and text from the master plan to the overlay zone. And so you have a project that comes in that's trying to kind of navigate both of those. And so I think you have a project that's trying to fit the zone, so to speak, which I think is where he was headed with that. But I don't want to put words in his mouth. I just reading between the lines, and I know that he's been very focused on Silver Spring, and I know that there was an issue with an overlay zone and a project that came in that was really trying to navigate both aspects of that, plus a new development.
So in looking at the flats at Knowles Station, they have a really cool website. So I was just kind of looking on here at the different things. And one lady made the comment that their process kind of stretched out because they had a lot of community engagement and comment at the top of the project. And because they haven't finished yet, we can't really tell like if that is going to work out for them in the end, whereas the other ones that didn't have the sketch plan and site and all that stuff submitted together at the top, and their drag out kind of happened on the back end. So I think one good thing for us to maybe add is like a debrief. I don't know if y'all already do that, but at the end of a project, just kind of have like a closeout debrief and find out what were the pros, what were the cons, and that could be a future work that is collecting data that we're kind of trying to analyze now with the numbers that we are having a hard time doing. So I just wanted to say that. But one thing that they had in their site plans that I know is new to zoning is the live work, residencies. And so I just wondered, the zoning that was referenced as a pain point was more for the density, but is live work for our economic development something that's new in terms of zoning that, people, I guess I'm kind of looking at Lavu.
My short answer was going to be no, that it's not super new, I guess, depending what we're calling new.
Right, and I think I don't think it's new, Sharice. It's how it's, and we haven't had very many projects that involve live-work units in the county, because you really need to have a very strong pedestrian focus and realm, and kind of a large amount of community area for people to activate a live-work unit. And, I mean, we've seen it at Kentlands. We do have a few that were constructed in Silver Spring, but we don't have that many coming in. In this case, I think what you do see since 2014 is a change to the zoning. So you have the CR and the CRT zones that offer a flexibility so that you can provide a different, whether it's live work or it's flex space, that allows kind of a change in that type of use. So hopefully that helps with the answer. And I like the idea about the debrief. I think that we as the planners, and even with our colleagues in the different agencies, I think internally we do debriefs on these projects, but probably not the way that I think you were suggesting, which I think is a really good idea to
Yeah, I'll add, one more thing again to round that out, and Carrie can correct me if I'm wrong, but I actually worked in Mid-County when this project started, and that was in the throes of the pandemic, and so there was, the applicant, I believe, was trying to respond to people working from home, that they would have more of an official office and sort of workspace than just working in some random corner or room in your house that you turned into an office. So there was that thought as well. We haven't really seen that trend continue yet, but I don't know, it could come back to life. The live-work unit itself is not a new concept. There was sort of de-emphasis, just from natural market trends and preferences, but with the pandemic and people more teleworking, working from home, it is something I think we're starting to see either incorporated into housing units, or a use like this itself could come back to life and take some life here. We're still seeing how that plays out.
And I think jokingly, we've heard that basically every unit in the States these days is a live work unit to some degree.
Right.
To be distinguished from home occupations, which are also under certain conditions allowable. So,
And I just wanted to jump in, Carrie Sanders, just so everybody has the most latest information. This project did have an amendment recently to change the live work to hoteling units. So some of the thinking changed on that during the pandemic in terms of this individual project.
All right, so what we're going to do for the next 5 minutes.
Can I just second the notion of sort of a lessons learned review, both at the project level, because I do think it's so valuable to go back and look at the rendering versus the reality of what actually happened on the ground and how it functions as a building. But then also at a master plan level as well. I know that the planning department has done that for White Flint, and it was really interesting to go back after 10 years and read, where things stood with that plan and why. So I just think that's such a great idea. And then one more thing where I want to say maybe there's a pain point to look at in the future also is undergrounding power lines. I know that comes up a lot. It's very contentious. It's going to be a bigger and bigger issue. And so just put a pin in that.
Retrofitting existing ones and putting them underground? Or,
Yeah.
All right. In the consulting firm I used to work for a long time ago, we used to call those after-action reviews, right? So it's like once all is said and done, looking back across the whole thing to see where we could have done better. So for the next 5 minutes, there are pads of Post-it notes. You can use your pens, but I'd like, and I know we're only kind of halfway through this process. There's probably lots more information and data you might feel like you need, but I'd love just to get everyone thinking based on everything you've heard, not just today, but from the beginning of this process, everything you've read, things you've heard from the public so far. If you could just jot down a recommendation that you might want to have considered at this stage of the game about what could be improved, what part of the process could be improved. And what's not here on this slide, I would also add, especially if it would have a positive impact for future economic development, because ultimately I think that's the part of the essence of why this letter of intent was written. So just thinking about improvement recommendations you'd make at this juncture, one per Post-it note. You can do 2, you can do 3. If you have the time, you can do more. I'd like to get at least one from everyone in the working group. And then we'll move on just talking about next steps. We're not going to talk about them. We'll talk about them next time. But I just want to see what we generate here in the next 5 minutes or so. Based on everything you've learned so far, everything you've heard so far, are there specific recommendations that you would make at this juncture for the overall development review process that you think would have a big impact in improving kind of economic development?
So how do you get ours, Steve?
Can you put them in chat, and then I'll grab them before the end of the meeting?
So we're putting them in a chat to you. Okay.
Yep. Or to
Okay.
the owner. I'm not the owner of this meeting, but to whoever is.
Whoever the host is.
But yeah, if you could put it in the chat, that would be great, Diane.
Okay.
Anyone else need a pen? I've got extra pens up here if you need them. There was a pad right here, but it disappeared. Oh, okay. So
I see. Thank you.
Alan's got the one for this table. You've got some.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm fine.
All right, I'm just going to do 5 minutes of silence here, let you guys think and write.
Just want to mention, no, SHA did not sign. Yeah,
Great, thanks.
the lead agency thing.
and make sure it's legible, so when I'm reading it over the weekend,
Now you're asking a lot.
that I can actually interpret what you said. And these are all anonymous unless you want to identify yourself, so no need to put your name on top unless you want to. Have any done, I'll collect them, and just put them up on flip chart. Thank you. On a roll, Tim. Ready to go? Amanda, these ready to go? Okay.
Steve? Thank you.
Yeah, please tell.
All right, let me give you one more minute so we can wrap up. You can continue writing. Oh, Mike, right, sorry. Yeah, so let me give you one more minute. You can keep writing as we exit out of here. I've posted everything I've gotten so far on the flip charts. You might want to take a look at the range of ideas before you leave. But there are a few things that we want to just quickly go over before we close out formally. All right, so just a reminder, we have our next meeting is a public hearing, Wednesday, August 2nd. It's virtual. It'll be from 6 to 8. It'll be chaired by Delegate Lopez. Our internal team has not talked about the logistics of that, so we probably need to do that early.
August 8th, not 2nd, right?
August 2nd is the next public hearing.
Oh.
August 8th is the next
Thank you.
working group meeting. Will be probably, Robert, on the 3rd floor, not the 2nd floor. One of the, what's that? It is nice and cool. If we do it in here again, we're going to do a different room setup, though. I feel like you guys are so far away from me. So a primary focus, but not an exclusive focus next time, will be on public comment. We will also definitely take a look at what has emerged from this group as a result of what you just generated. We got a bunch of comments through the chat that we'll incorporate into that as well. We can circulate that next week to all of you. And then again, 2nd August meeting, the 24th, and then 3 meetings in September, and we'll make sure that that gets on your calendars next week. And then before we do that, if Isaac, if you can put up the survey. I don't know if folks picked up a copy of the draft question, not survey, draft questionnaire. I've got extra copies here if you want to see it. So let me just hand that out quickly. Isaac, is there a way of making that any bigger if you need it? So again, this is a way to get some additional feedback. I think we said last working group meeting that we primarily wanted to make sure that we were getting input from the development community. But obviously, this is going to go out to a much larger list, the planning's list. We would send this out next week. So as you can see, if you have the handout in front of you, first we're just trying to understand what role do people play in the development review process. Then the next, if you can scroll for me, Isaac, or maybe I just need one in front of me. Then we also just want to understand their familiarity with the development review process. And then we have a series of 8 or 9 questions, some quantitative, some qualitative, around level of satisfaction, what works well, what needs improvement, what needs to change, some questions around E-plans, and then any particular comments around specific types of things around submittals, design, utilities, site distance, et cetera. So
take a look at that. We're not going to discuss it now, but take a look at that. Our internal planning group has gone through 3 or 4 versions of this. We wanted to share it with you. Again, this will go out to a fairly large list next week, but if you have any questions or concerns about it, please email me just so I can flag it and see if we're close to being able to push go on the questionnaire or whether it still needs a little bit more work. So just wanted you to be aware that that's happening. It came out of a conversation we had in the previous working group meeting. So again, it will be another source of data and perspective that we can collect and then share with the entire group sometime later in August. All right, and with that, I think we're done unless anyone has any final questions, comments. Alan.
Yeah, will the virtual public meeting be recorded?
Yes, it will.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead, Sharice.
There was a lot of feedback with regards to the 2 minutes. I can't remember if we talked about this before, like it's just gonna be 2 minutes and that's it, or if there's flexibility or no.
So when I shared that with Delegate Lopez, her feeling was wanting to make it kind of a level playing field across all 3 hearings. And so since we did 2 minutes the first time and the second time, we're going to keep it at that. People always have the option of additional submissions through the website if they have more they feel like they need to say. So we should remind them of that on August 2nd, that that's you know, where they can make additional comments.
And Steve, I think the website where they sign up has been updated, so it's very clear that they have 2
That they
minutes
have
now.
that.
So that was not, I think, clear initially early
Okay.
on, but we did try to add that, I believe.
Great, thanks, Patrick. Livu? Patrick, share the mic.
Oh, boy. I just want to note for the review of public comment, so Pam and I are going to make a chart, but because we want to get that chart out to the group by August 6th, any public comment we receive after that date will not be on that chart. So just flagging that for everybody for anything that comes in more recently. And obviously, we'll accept public comment as long as this
Right,
work group is
for after that,
happening.
yep.
But that chart that goes out will only be up to August 6th.
Right. And that will give us an opportunity next time to really digest not just specific and individual comments, but looking for patterns and trends in terms of what people are telling us with regard to feedback. So appreciate Livu and Pam doing that. Amanda?
Are we giving people a deadline for this survey that's going out?
We have not talked about that. You know, what I would say, it's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of a week and a half of having it open,
Okay,
like 7 to 8 business days.
so that'll come in after
Yes.
that summary.
Yeah, so we
It'll
won't
be
be
a
looking at that on August 8th. We'll have to look at that at the second August meeting. Kate?
Just a suggestion, since it is August and everybody's on vacation, we
Right.
may want to extend the window of the
time
survey
frame.
so that it's longer, because this is just a
Good-
lot
good
of
point.
vacations for everybody.
The August bugaboo, right? Or at least the theory is everyone goes away. I'm still not completely sure of that, but
Everyone checks out, though.
checking out is different than going away, right? All right, I think that's it. If you have additional Post-its to put up, please put them up. And before you leave, if you want to, you can take a look at what people have said, and I will type them all up and get them circulated next week. But thank you very much. Really good conversation today. Thank you to the team for the joint presentation, really helpful. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time, even though it's August. All right? Take care, everyone.